I mean, if Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, I say go for it, Elon. I don't think he'll like it when he gets there. I mean, as many people have pointed out who know more about Mars than I do, there's no way to transform the Earth into something as terrible as Mars. No matter how bad things get.
Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Parton and you are listening to The Feedback Loop on Singularity Radio, where we keep you up to date on the latest technological trends and how they're impacting the transformation of consciousness and culture. This week our guest is journalist and author Elizabeth Kolbert, whose work focuses heavily on climate change. Her books on the subject include Field Notes from a Catastrophe, The Sixth Extinction, which won a Pulitzer Prize, and her most recent 2021 book, Under a White Sky. In this episode, we explore the content and ideas that Elizabeth puts forth in these books with a particular focus on what kind of changes that climate change is causing to the world and the ways in which humanity has been responding, for better or worse. As a quick note, I do want to let you know there are a few moments of unfortunate background noise that arise sporadically during this conversation that were unavoidable, but they're minimal, they pass quickly, and they really shouldn't detract too much from the conversation. So please don't let those deter you from enjoying this full episode. And with that being said, let's just go ahead and jump into it. Everyone, please welcome to the Feedback Loop, Elizabeth Kolbert. Well, to start, I think a good place is, since you've been writing books about climate change for at least 15 years now, I think, this is obviously a subject that's very important to you. Was this a attraction that you had ever since you were a kid, or was there a moment that sparked the interest that really made you realize that this was a thing you wanted to focus on? Because in a way, you were kind of ahead of the curve. I mean, there's definitely been people who have been concerned about the planet for a long time, but I don't think the climate change conversation really kicked off until around the time maybe your first book came out.
Well, I was one of those people who was very influenced by Bill McKibben's early work on climate change, The End of Nature, which I have a first edition of, actually. I went right out and bought it. And that was back in 1989. So, this quote unquote conversation has been going on for a long time. And then when I myself went to the New Yorker, Bill's book ran for the much of it ran originally in the New Yorker. By that point, Bill was not at the magazine for a while, and I sort of thought, well, and there's a lot of still debate at that point. This was in the early 2000s, even among scientists. I think it's important to acknowledge that, how significant was this going to be? How big a deal was it? And I sort of got this crazy idea that I was going to settle this debate by writing a 3-part series that is what became Field Notes from a Catastrophe. And at around the same time that Field Notes came out, or a year after the series came out, but when it came out as a book, Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth came out. That was very big. So I think that was, I'd love to take credit for having changed the conversation, but I think, there were a bunch of things that happened sort of simultaneously that did get a fair amount of attention, did not lead to the kind of action you might hope for, but did sort of get some attention for the issue.
Mm-hmm. And a key theme of your work and all of this throughout is the idea of the Anthropocene. Could you talk a little bit about what that is for people who might not be familiar with the term and kind of what it entails?
Sure. So the Anthropocene refers to really the idea that humans have become the dominant force on planet Earth, a force that is leaving a permanent geological record. The way we're changing the climate. Scientists are very actively looking at it. It turns out, there are all sorts of ways in which our transformation of the planet will leave a permanent geological mark. And so that's really idea of the Anthropocene, and it's will be taken up at some point. I think the pandemic may have delayed it as a formal question in geology. Should we rename our current geological epoch, which is formally known as the Holocene?
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the major impacts that you've seen, or the particular areas, I suppose? Because you've gotten to do a lot of travel, see a lot of different projects, talk to a lot of people from all walks of life. Are there really strong recurring themes in terms of the places that you're seeing the impact being the most drastic from climate change?
Well, I think we're now seeing, virtually everywhere. So when I started out in this, on this beat, if you want to call it that, the impacts were really most dramatic and continue to be most dramatic in the Arctic. And this is a phenomenon that was predicted early on. It's called the Arctic amplification. So the temperature increases, you will read about these, crazy temperatures in Greenland and Alaska, and that's a function of a bunch of different things. But yeah, so the impacts are still, and the temperature increases, you can look at maps where they show you the temperature increases, and you worldwide, say since 1900 or whatever, and you'll see the big bands are in the Arctic, really, red. So that's where the greatest temperature change has been. And that reflects a bunch of reasons why the Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the planet. One of which is that we're melting a lot of the ice, and ice is very reflective. You melt it back to water or land, that's much more absorptive. So you're really changing the heat balance very dramatically now. But nowadays you could go, I can go to my backyard, where we didn't have frost for until, I guess, basically very recently, as recently as 20, 30 years ago, we would have had a frost in here where I am in Western New England, definitely by equinox, or around the end of September. So a month of no, just everywhere you look, there are signs that are getting really very difficult to overlook, that the climate is changing.
Yeah, aside from some of the more common things that we think about, like the ocean and permafrost and things like that, there's a lot to be said about the flora and fauna and the biodiversity that we're losing. What are some of the impacts that are coming from that I think kind of go often unseen or untalked about because of the other larger talking points?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're huge. Now coral reefs, I guess they have gotten a certain amount of attention. They are really getting hit really hard by warm water temperatures. That is a huge issue. And coral reefs are really crucial ecosystems for marine life. So that's a big one. There's a lot of trees, forest diebacks that are occurring because the pests that, bark beetles and things like that used to be, like in the American West, used to have one cycle every year. Basically they could only reproduce once a year. Now they can do it twice a year, let's say, and they have a much longer season where they're active. And so you're seeing huge forest diebacks. So these fires that we're getting that have massive impacts, obviously, on anything that lives in them. You're seeing certain kinds of insect pests moving farther north. So that has having a big impact in a lot of places. So the list is, almost endless. You're seeing, drought habitat change very radically. If you're a frog or an amphibian and something that depended on a watering hole that isn't there anymore, that's huge. But, most of these impacts on a very fine grain scale, we're not even aware. We're not really even keeping track very carefully.
Yeah, a big part of our focus at Singularity is on helping what's called the Rising Billion. And that's the people from, like Africa and India who are starting to come online in the global scene and are starting to try to meet the Western standard of living. What what is that impact going to be in your mind? Because it doesn't seem like we can support a billion more people embracing the Western standard of living, even though we want to help alleviate issues that are taking place in those areas.
Well, you've gotten to the heart of the matter. I mean, how can we both meet our ecological goals? Sustainable development is sort of the buzzword, and I think that if you look at things, honestly, you have to say, well, if a billion people um, are going to and should and deserve to live better, then those of us who are already consuming way more than our fair share uh, probably can't continue to do that, or definitely can't continue to do that unless you want to, wreck the whole planet. And that tension, that idea that some people, a lot of people, we're not talking about a trivial number of people. We're not just talking about, the Jeff, Bezoses of the world. We are talking about all of us, you and I, who are sitting here today. And most of your listeners, I suspect, are going to have to give up to something. That is not a popular political take. So I'm not in politics, so I can say it.
What do you think the reconciliation is there between governments and big corporations having to make some big changes, maybe policies that really force their hand versus the individual? Is the paper straw going to matter if we're doing government funded oil?
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the things that people focus on, as you say, the straw, I mean, straws are bad. Paper straws, not so much. Plastic straws, end up in the oceans. Plastic pollution in the ocean is a serious problem. I do not want to trivialize that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But the you're not taking a straw, I can assure you, is not solving this problem. I advise you not to take the straw, but that's not going to do it. And you're not drinking from the plastic water bottle. None of those things are going to do it. So as you are implying, we have some pretty big changes, and many people have concluded. And once again, I am, going to punt. I'm not an expert here. I'm not going to say I know what's right here, but many people have concluded, well, the whole economic system has to go. We can't have a system, profit driven, extractive economy when, the world is crumbling. Now, that's a lot easier said. We need a new system. Okay, what is that new system? It's a lot easier said than done. And as you point out, there are a lot of people who would like a better standard of living, the kind of standard of living that, extractive capitalism has brought to many of us. So these are huge issues. They're not small issues. They're huge issues. They are, in my view, the issue.
Yeah. So it sounds like in a lot of ways you would say that to fix climate change really comes down to changing the human condition most fundamentally in terms of how we interface with the world right now.
Well, I mean, this is the question. Once again, I don't want to, there's one school of thought that says, actually capitalism can solve climate change. We're technologically very smart. We need to shift out our energy systems. We need to be a lot smarter about the way we do things. And we could both raise the standard of living for a billion people and reduce certainly our carbon output, to zero. We could do that if we put our minds to it. The question of whether that is true or not, right? I can't answer that, but there is a school of thought out there that is true. And in fact, that's our best hope. And then there's another school of thought that, as long as you keep the same economic system, you're just going to reproduce the problems that we have, and perhaps reproduce them in different, maybe not reproduce the same problems, but produce new problems, right? So, I can give you an example of you could switch to all electric cars. That would have a huge carbon impact, but you'd have to get the ingredients for the electric cars, and that might lead to whole new horrors around the world. So these are super, super difficult questions. And anyone who tells you that they have the answer to them, you should be extremely suspicious of.
Absolutely. So in Under the White Sky, I think that's a big focus, right? Is these interventions that we take part in a lot of ways, technological solutions end up creating other problems. Can you talk a little bit about what you came across in your, travels and your research on these subjects?
Yeah, sure. So the sort of idea behind the theme of the book, Under White Sky, is we keep doing things. Sometimes we do them purposefully, sometimes we do them inadvertently. That, to get back to this idea of the Anthropocene, that really radically, dramatically changed the planet, either on a local, regional scale, or now with climate change on a global scale. And then our tendency is to go search for the next technology that's going to solve this, or we're going to, so we've created a problem with our technology, we're going to get a new technology, we're going to layer that on top of the old technology, we're going to solve it. And a very, very good example of this, and it's going to be a huge issue, I can assure your listeners that they're only going to hear more and more about this in coming years, is carbon dioxide removal. So in the book, I visit a plant in Iceland. It's since actually expanded, even since I've been there, where they are actively taking CO2 out of the air. And the idea here is, well, we've already put too much CO2 into the air. It's not like we're going to put too much into it. We already have. And that is true. And as we go on, we're not stopping our emissions tomorrow, no matter what anyone tells you. That is not happening. So, the more we put in, the more we're going to have to take out. And a lot of the projections, if you hear a projection like, the world still has a chance to keep average global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees C. I agree that I know this is getting a little nerdy, but all those projections already include a lot of carbon dioxide removal. So we are depending on this technology that really barely exists at this point. And that's what we tend to do. Like, something is going to save us. And the reason we have faith for that, I believe, is because, well, here we are. There are 8 billion of us. There have been many, many predictions of doom in the past, and yet humanity, there are more humans than ever before. So we must have some magical solution always up our sleeve. And maybe we do. I can't tell you.
Yeah, I mean, there is also seems to be this hopeful notion in Under the White Sky Under a White Sky that also suggests that technology or some kind of intervention is necessary. Like, we do have to do some kind of engineering task, right, to also solve these issues.
I'm pretty careful in the book not to take a stand as to whether, these interventions are net positive or negative. The ones that we're planning to do to, counteract our previous interventions. But the one thing that I would say is, one of the themes of the book too, I think, is in a lot of cases, we don't feel we have a choice. What are the choices here? They're not really this idea of doing nothing, like, let's let the world heal itself, or, whatever, that's not going to work when, you've already put up too much CO2. So we feel compelled, and probably are compelled, to do something.
Yeah. Amongst maybe all of the interventions that you explored, or maybe ones that you didn't talk about in the book, are there any initiatives or projects or technologies that you're particularly hopeful about, things that you think are going to be worth investigating more, or maybe have the best chance to create an impact?
Well, I do think we really need to look at, agriculture, how we grow our food. There is a lot of potential to do that a lot better, to actually, use certain, store more carbon in soils, for example. And that's huge. And, people have pointed to, we need to reforest a lot of the world, or let the world reforest itself. Once again, all of these things are a lot easier said than done. There's a lot of talk about reforestation, for example. But the fact is the world continues to deforest. So, but I do think those are very important, that we should certainly be trying to use both agriculture, land use, as a way to both minimize our emissions and also potentially, draw us down some CO2. But it's not going to be sufficient. Once again, you do have to be careful when people throw around numbers that are too rosy. How's that?
Yeah. What do you think about efforts like the ones Elon Musk is undertaking? Things like certainly Solar City and Tesla, but also like Mars. A lot of people are worried that SpaceX is this kind of escapist tactic for billionaires who are ready to just let the planet die. But others would argue that those efforts create technology that could help us on Earth. What do you think about efforts like that? Do you think we should focus more on the planet, or do you think there's going to be benefits from these larger projects?
I'm really down on Mars. I think Mars is like, if Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, I say go for it, Elon. I don't think he'll like it when he gets there. And there's just no way. As many people have pointed out, who know more about Mars than I do, there's no way to transform the Earth into something as terrible as Mars. No matter how bad things get. Because, we have air pressure here, which turns out to be really important. If you've ever, tried to go into a no pressure, no atmosphere planet, you'll find yourself basically exploding. So not a good idea. And there's oxygen, which, really is, pretty damn basic. So the idea that, billionaires are going to escape to Mars, good luck with that. And the money that we're spending, I think, the idea that we're going to figure out something useful for Earth, maybe, but in the meantime, we're going to have wasted a lot of money and carbon emissions, to be honest, also that we didn't need to, and diverted a lot of attention. But, Elon doesn't ask for my advice. How's that? But I think this whole space race and putting people into space for fun is sick, really, actually a sign of this kind of moral depravity of our time.
And in spite of all that, are you hopeful given all that you've seen? Like, do you feel like we're making progress in a tangible way?
No, I don't think we're making progress in a tangible way. I think there have been many. The hopeful things are, I will point to the hopeful things in the interest of objectivity. The price of certain forms of, solar energy, wind energy have come way down. And that suggests that it's possible, if we put our minds to it, if we really did put our minds to it, that we could find ways to do things that would make a significant difference. But, if you look at what's actually happening, yes, a lot of solar is going up, a lot of wind's going up, but a lot of fossil fuels are being burned still. And the basic energy mix, of the planet has not changed very much since the 1980s. So we're still getting basically I think it was around 80% of our primary energy from fossil fuels. And that has been just stuck. Now, could it change? It could, but we are talking about concerted effort. And as you and I speak, in Washington, there's a debate over a bill that is probably the only bill we'll get, that will have clean energy provisions. It's very watered down already. It's been very watered down. So I don't see how we get from here to there, given politics, not necessarily technology, but given politics.
Yeah. What do you think has to change in terms of either the public perception or the politics around this? Because when there's very few things that I think about and that I actually almost have anxiety over. But if I, for instance, watch a documentary on climate change, I start to get mad and just feel kind of hopeless. And it's one of the only things that truly seems to shake me.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be with that feeling. I don't understand how we're not doing more. Why are we not more as a culture focused on this? Do you think what has to change to wake us up?
I honestly don't know. People used to say, well, something's going to wake us up, some big natural disaster, we're going to watch California burn, we're going to watch, but clearly that's not the case. Although I do think that, I think a really interesting test would be to go to communities that have been devastated by climate related disasters and sort of track attitudes over time. That would be very interesting. And I don't know if anyone's done that. You'd have to have it before, you'd have to know which communities you have to get hit. But, I think that, what we've discovered, in my opinion, once again, one woman's opinion during COVID, is that people's, capacity for self-delusion, how many stories have we all read about, like people on the respirator saying, really should have gotten that vaccine. People's capacities to believe things that unfortunately are simply not true are really, really strong. And, and there's also a worry, and I share it. I do share it, that people look at climate change and then they get, very worried, as you do, and you're really worried, but you feel impotent because it is and that people shut down. They're like, well, what can I do? What can anyone do? What can one country do? And all those things are true, but they don't, in my view, really absolve us of the responsibility to do something.
Yeah. On that note, what do you think is something that a single individual could do? Like if there was one thing, we talked about the straws may not be the most effective, maybe more concerted efforts really are necessary, but for the person who is feeling, I want to do something with my limited capacity, are there things that you've seen that might be the particularly impactful or helpful?
Yeah. Where do most of our emissions come from as, sort of individuals? They're how we heat our homes and cool them, how we travel. So those are biggies, so, putting solar panels on your roof. That is or if you live in an apartment, you can, in a lot of places, you do pay a premium for clean energy, but you are participating then you are in this energy transition that has to happen. So those are things that people can do. And I know solar panels can come way down in price. They pay for themselves now in about 7 years, I think. So, it's not something only people with a lot of money can do at this point. So that's one thing. How we cool our homes too and heat them. There are fantastic new technologies, once again, heat pumps that are really much more efficient than the, ways that we have tended to heat and cool in the past. So those are another thing that people can look at. Those are still somewhat pricey, but are coming down in price. And certainly in parts of the world where people have big air conditioning bills right now are probably worth looking at. How we travel, how do you get around? Do you take public transportation? If you have to drive, and many Americans unfortunately do, because our public transportation is pretty bad. What kind of car are you driving? We've had, gas prices have been, in this country over the last several years, kind of ridiculously cheap. And that has encouraged a lot of people to, unfortunately, buy cars that are way bigger than they need. Make your next car an electric car, so there are those kinds of choices. Do you need to take that trip? Do you need to fly? Flying is very carbon intensive. So those are the things, I think, those are the biggies for individuals that are top of the list.
Mm-hmm. And from like a government policy perspective, are there certain policies that you think we could enact that would really be big game changers?
Oh yeah. we could tax carbon. We could impose a tax that would, instead of an income tax or the way we fund things now, a payroll tax, you could substitute a carbon tax. And that would, dramatically change the way it would shift the way businesses do business, because everything would have to be measured in terms of well, or, is that what we want to do? Because, and if you made it, so that it has an actual bite, it would be, it would change things very dramatically. I believe, and I think it's hard to argue with that. Now, there's a lot of opposition to that for all sorts of reasons. And some of it comes from people who argue that, a carbon tax is regressive, which I don't even think is really honestly that true, because, carbon use tends to scale with income. But yes, certain people who are, dependent on their trucks or whatever and are low income, but you could easily design these systems so that people are getting, a rebate. And if you'd have to use a lot of carbon to come out, worse off than you are now. And that would really ripple through the economy. And, but there's no way we're getting that right now. And I don't know if we ever will, but, there's going to be more and more talk about that. You're going to hear more and more about that, because it's the only tool that within the economic system we have right now that people can think of to really make a difference.
Yeah. Elizabeth, I want to respect your time. I know you have a lot going on right now, so I'll just leave here with one more question. Is there anything that you want to talk about, that you want to let our audience know about? Maybe anything about your book, audiobooks, anything you're working on? Just let us know.
Okay. Well, I'm going to end with a plea to people, to your listeners, which is, we really need, and this is not my book. My book is a lot more, focused on kind of really big picture issues, but also, telling a bunch of stories that I hope actually are kind of fun stories, to be honest, even though the subject is very, very heavy. But the plea is that, American politics have really been stuck on this issue. And I don't even know if your listenership is mostly American or around the world, but around the world, politics have been stuck on this issue. And people, we need, a lot of people power to unstick them. And so that would be, I guess, the note that I would leave on, make if you are concerned about these issues, climate change in particular, which, Lord knows you should be, then make your voices heard to your elected officials. And when you go to vote, vote for those who take this issue seriously, because that's the only way I think something's going to get done.
Perfect. Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.